In the crisp autumn of 1218, when the first chill wind swept down from the Tian Shan and the grapes of Transoxiana hung heavy on the vine, a caravan of 450 Muslim merchants, 500 camels loaded with Chinese silk, Siberian sable, white silver ingots, jade cups carved with dragons, and a single chest of black pearls the size of pigeons' eggs, escorted by 100 Mongol guards and bearing a letter sealed with the golden Palisa of Temujin, who now called himself Genghis Khan, crossed the Jaxartes, the modern Sir Daria, and entered the walled city of Otrar, a dusty frontier fortress of the mighty Khwarezmian Empire whose governor, Gaya Khan, called Inalchuk by the Persians, a corpulent nephew of the Shah's formidable mother Turkan Khatun, received the visitors with the false courtesy of a man weighing profit against risk, and after 3 days of feigned hospitality, he ordered the entire caravan arrested on charges of espionage, the goods confiscated to his private treasury, the Mongol guards beheaded in the main square while the merchants were locked in the citadel's dungeons. And when news of the outrage reached the Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad II in his palace at Urgench, a city of 60 madrasas and canals lined with plane trees, the Shah, already dreaming of conquering Baghdad and China, and convinced that the distant Tatar chieftain was merely another steppe barbarian who could be humbled, sent back a single mutilated envoy with his lips and ears cut off, and the message, "If your master wishes war, let him come," thereby committing the single most catastrophic miscalculation in medieval Islamic history, because the survivor of the massacre, a lowly camel herd who had hidden beneath a pile of corpses for 3 days, crawled out under cover of darkness, walked and rode stolen horses 800 miles across the starving Kipchak steppe, and finally collapsed before Genghis Khan's yurt on the upper Tula River in Mongolia, where the great Khan, upon hearing every detail of the insult, climbed a solitary hill, removed his hat, placed his forehead to the earth, and remained there for 3 full days without food or water, while his generals waited in silence. And when he descended, his eyes were red and his voice calm as winter iron as he spoke the words that would murder 2 million people. "This war was not of my making, but I will be its ending." And immediately the entire Mongol nation was summoned to a great Kurultai, every male from 16 to 60, every spare horse, every iron cauldron, every arrow, and by the winter solstice of 1218 to 19, an army of 200,000 horsemen, the largest land force ever assembled to that date, stood ready on the frozen Irtish, accompanied by 5,000 Chinese engineers who carried the secrets of gunpowder bombs, counterweight trebuchets, and fire lances, while the Khan divided the host into 4 great wings, Chagatai and Ogadai, to strike through the Fergana Valley, Gyochi to sweep the lower Sir Daria, Jebe and Subutai to ride north and then west in their legendary circumnavigation of the Caspian, and Genghis himself with his youngest son Tolui to drive straight for the heart of Khwarezm along the ancient Silk Road, and in February 1219, when the rivers were still ice, the greatest invasion in pre-modern history crossed into Central Asia, while the Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad, possessing perhaps 500,000 professional soldiers, Turkish ghulams in lamella armor, Afghan hillmen, Arab cavalry, Daylami infantry, and 60 war elephants, made the fatal decision to disperse his forces into static garrisons behind city walls, rather than concentrate for a decisive field battle, believing that stone and numbers would prevail where mobility and cohesion were absent, and thus condemned every city in his empire to isolation and annihilation one by one in a 4-year storm of engineered destruction that still stands as the single most devastating campaign of deliberate urban genocide before the 20th century. The first city to feel the full weight of Mongol vengeance was Otrar itself, the place of the original sin, and Genghis arrived in the autumn of 1219 with 80,000 riders and the new Chinese siege train, surrounding the city so completely that not even a rat could escape, damming the Sir Daria to flood the fields and cut the aqueducts, building a wooden palisade twice the height of a man around the entire circumference. And for 5 months the bombardment never ceased. Day and night the counterweight trebuchets hurled 90-kilogram stones that smashed towers like eggshells, while gunpowder bombs filled with iron shards exploded over the battlements, and Mongol sappers, protected by movable sheds of ox hide, dug 27 tunnels beneath the walls, packing them with fat-soaked timber and sulfur until the very foundations burned. And when the outer town finally fell, the inhabitants were driven into the fields and used as human shields for the final assault. And on the citadel roof, Genghis Khan fought with a two-handed scimitar until a Mongol arrow pierced his open mouth and he toppled backward into the flames, after which every defender was put to the sword, the women and children driven into the Great Mosque and burned alive. And of the 70,000 souls who had lived in Otrar, only 20,000 artisans were spared, chained at the ankles, and marched east, while the rest were slaughtered so thoroughly that when the city was set alight, it burned for 7 days and 7 nights. The column of smoke visible as far as Samarkand as a deliberate warning of what awaited those who insulted the great Khan. From Otrar, the Mongol tide rolled southwest to Bukhara, the holy city of 100 mosques, and the greatest library outside Baghdad, whose garrison of 110,000 Turkish mercenaries believed the walls built by the Samanids 1,000 years earlier would hold forever. But Genghis bypassed the fortifications by a night march through flooded rice paddies that no defender thought possible, and at dawn, the Mongol banners appeared at the eastern gate, while Jebe's Tumen closed from the north, and in the panic the garrison sallied out in perfect order, only to be enveloped and cut to pieces in the suburbs. After which the city elders opened the gates begging for mercy, and Genghis rode his horse straight into the great Friday Mosque, an act of blasphemy that silenced the imams, dismounted on the prayer carpets, climbed the minbar, and addressed the trembling multitude. "I am the Flail of God. Had you not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you," and then demanded every ounce of gold, every virgin daughter, every artisan, and when the city had been stripped bare, he ordered the library torched, centuries of Persian and Arabic scholarship rising in black clouds, and the remaining 80,000 inhabitants were driven into the Kizil Kum desert and massacred, leaving only the tallest minarets standing as signposts for future caravans to know what fate awaited the proud. 3 weeks later, in March 1220, the jewel of the Silk Road itself, Samarkand, faced the same apocalypse, a city of 200,000 defended by 40,000 elite Turkish ghulams, 20,000 citizen militia, 60 war elephants, and commanded by the Shah's redoubtable mother, Turkan Khatun, a woman who had once bathed in the blood of enemies, and who now swore to fight to the last. But after only 5 days of bombardment, the Chinese gunpowder mines brought down entire sections of the wall. The ghulams sallied and were annihilated by the classic Mongol encirclement. The war elephants were panicked by flaming naphtha arrows and trampled their own troops, and when the city fell, Turkan Khatun was dragged from the citadel, stripped naked, paraded on a donkey through streets running with blood while the Mongols laughed, then locked in an iron cage and sent east to Karakoram, where she would die years later in captivity. And of Samarkand's population, 50,000 were slaughtered in the first 3 days, 30,000 craftsmen marched away in chains, and the rest were used to fill the moat so the Mongol horses could ride over their bodies into the Registan, leaving the once glittering city a smoldering ruin whose silence lasted for generations. While Genghis systematically erased the Khwarezmian heartland, the Shah himself, hearing of each disaster with mounting despair, abandoned his capital at Urgench and fled westward with 30,000 remaining loyalists, convinced the Mongols could not pursue across the vastness of Persia. But he had not reckoned with Jebe and Subutai, the 2 greatest pursuit generals in history, who were unleashed with 30,000 light cavalry and orders to hunt the Shah to the ends of the earth. And for 18 months they rode through Nishapur, where they killed the Shah's favorite son, through Rai Hamadan and the Elburz mountains, crossing rivers in flood, climbing snow-choked passes, living off horse blood and melted snow, until the Shah, broken in body and spirit, died of pleurisy on a miserable island in the Caspian in the winter of 1221, wrapped in a fisherman's cloak while his hunters were still only days away. And even then, Jebe and Subutai did not turn back but continued their legendary ride around the Caspian, defeating Georgians, Alans, Kipchaks, and Volga Bulgars before rejoining Genghis in 1224, having traveled over 7,000 miles and never lost a battle. In the south, the youngest and most terrifying of Genghis's sons, Tolui, was given the task of finishing what his father had begun, and in 1221 he descended upon the ancient cities of Khorasan like the wrath of God incarnate. First Merv, then the 4th largest city in the world with 700,000 inhabitants, 12 libraries, and irrigation canals that had watered the desert since the Achaemenids, surrendered after a week of siege in exchange for promises of mercy, only for Tolui to order a census. Every soul driven into the plain outside the walls, and for 4 continuous days and nights the Mongol soldiers worked in shifts, slaughtering without pause until the chroniclers recorded between 700,000 and 1.3 million dead. The bodies piled into pyramids of skulls that stood for years as a warning to travelers, then Nishapur, which had the misfortune to revolt after the Mongols had passed, and Tolui returned in April 1221, and in a single day of apocalyptic vengeance, ordered every living creature killed, men, women, children, dogs, cats, even the birds in the trees, so thoroughly that Persian historians recorded 1,547,000 dead, and the city was erased so completely that it never truly recovered. Its libraries, its gardens, its very name, reduced to dust and memory. By 1222, the campaign was over. The Khwarezmian Empire, which only 4 years earlier had fielded 500,000 soldiers and ruled from the Caspian to the Indus, had ceased to exist. Its irrigation systems destroyed, its fields salted or abandoned to the desert, its population reduced by 2 to 4 million souls. Perhaps 15 to 20% of everyone alive between the Amu Darya and the Persian Gulf, and the Persian urban civilization that had flourished since Cyrus the Great was reduced to ghost towns whose silence lasted a century. While from the ruins Genghis extracted the only thing he valued more than vengeance, the 100,000 artisans, engineers, astronomers, and scribes who were marched in chains to Mongolia, where they built the silver tree fountain that poured 4 kinds of liquor in Kublai's palace, cast the bronze turtles of Xanadu, forged the trebuchets and bombs that would later break the Song dynasty and sack Baghdad, and taught the Mongols paper money, astronomy, and siegecraft, so that the civilization the Mongols murdered in Persia was paradoxically preserved and weaponized by the very craftsmen they spared, and one governor's arrogance had lit the fuse, while Genghis Khan's systematic, industrial-scale retribution became the single greatest act of deliberate urban annihilation before the 20th century, a 4-year storm of fire and blood that erased an empire, murdered millions, and turned the glittering heart of the Silk Road into a graveyard whose smoke drifted eastward for 100 years, a black banner announcing to the world that the age of cities had ended and the age of the horseman had begun, and that pride, when weighed against the boundless steppe, was measured only in corpses.